One of the easiest ways, I think, to understand about good management is through TV programmes. And more often than not, we often see like really bad management if you've ever watched The Apprentice or kind of other similar programmes. But I think one good example of really like amazing management, but also lots of different management lessons, is Ted Lasso. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the management lessons that I can see by watching one episode of Ted Lasso. And I'd love to know what you think. So please leave a comment below and let's get into it. So before you get into it, I would have to say, like, Ted Lasso is one of my favourite shows, management lessons or not. It's a perfect programme, it's enjoyable and it's lovely. So if you haven't watched the show yet, I'd recommend you going to watch the show before you watch this video, and we'll put a link below. But it's just because it's such a beautiful bit of television, and obviously it won loads of awards, and rightly so. And I wouldn't want you to take any enjoyment away from watching the show by watching this video and watching me kind of dissect it, kind of go through the characters. So please, if you haven't watched it, go do that now. But if you have, great, stay with me and we'll get into it. So one of the things I like most about Ted Lasso is it isn't just Ted that shows us some of the management lessons, but lots of the different characters show us different things about what good management looks like and what bad management looks like. So the first that we see kind of in the first episode is around Rebecca and her taking charge of the club following her husband's departure, and her first act is to fire the old manager. And this is basically about firing the dinosaurs. So as a manager, sometimes you need to clean shop, and sometimes you need to get rid of people who don't have the right values and don't have the right attitudes. This particular manager comes off as a real misogynist, and is definitely someone who you wouldn't want to have in your culture. But also he's someone who's relying on past successes and isn't really currently performing where he needs to be. And as such, for both of those reasons, Rebecca, her first act is to kind of get rid of him and clean shop. So her ability to spot what needs to change and to take action, and sometimes difficult action, is a really good management lesson. The second management lesson it shows is that Rebecca really knows her mind, and obviously she appoints Ted Lasso, as it turns out, for her own kind of reasons, but obviously those around her are kind of counselling her out of it, and perhaps challenging her viewpoint on it. But she sticks fast to what she believes in, which as a manager, like working in line with your own values and having integrity, is really important. So Rebecca again demonstrates really good leadership by sticking to her guns and appointing Ted. One of the first times we see Ted, it's in a clip of him celebrating with his old college football team in the locker room after a win. And what this shows about Ted is that he knows the importance of celebrating success, but equally joining in with the team and being someone that they can see as on a level with him. So from very early on in the programme, we get a sense of his kind of management style, but also the camaraderie and teamwork that he can build within his teams, which as a manager we should all be striving for. And similar to earlier on where we saw Rebecca not taking notice of some other people's opinions, Ted also does the same thing. So there's a great saying, which is, if you wouldn't take someone's advice, don't take their criticism. So Ted is being criticised, but he chooses not to take it because he knows that his own kind of guiding principles are strong enough, and it means that he kind of backs himself. So as a manager, there will be loads of people who perhaps will challenge you or criticise you, but knowing how you want to act, what your values are, and what's the best for the team should be your guiding principles, and Ted is someone who shows that in this programme. What we see from Coach Beard quite early on in this programme, and actually throughout the rest of the series, is that he's someone who does his research. He's always reading books, if you will notice, but he's always someone who's kind of reading, expanding his knowledge and seeking to understand things in greater depth, particularly around a sport that he doesn't know as well as college football. So as a manager, you should always be seeking to learn and to understand. And actually sometimes as a manager, your first reaction might be to immediately jump into problem solving mode, but actually understanding the issue in front of you, understanding those around you, and also continually to read and look to self-develop is one of the key traits of good leaders and good managers, and continually comes up in this show as well. By Ted and Coach Beard coming across from the US to coach in the UK, Ted knows the value of sometimes pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. And again, this is something he encourages people to do throughout the show, is slightly just pushing people to the edge of their comfort zone and beyond to help them achieve better things. And as a manager or a leader, you're going to have to do the same thing, both with yourself and perhaps with your team members. So sometimes as a manager, you'll be faced with situations that you've not seen before, but being able to deal with them and slightly become uncomfortable is necessary for growth. But also for your team members, spotting those people who have greater potential but perhaps haven't realised it yet, or need a little bit of a push to help them take the next step or to help them grow and expand in their current role. So sometimes just pushing people to the edge of their comfort zone is actually where the real growth and real development comes from. And actually people will really value a manager who's invested in them enough to understand that, understand them, understand where their strengths are, and actually just pushing them a little bit further for promotion. So Ted's really good at that, both for himself and for others. One of the other elements that's really good about Ted is there's a scene where he carries his own bags. He's offered help and he refuses. And that's quite a good lesson, because sometimes as managers we can get caught up in the trappings of success and the hierarchy, particularly if you work in really hierarchical organisations, and the respect that engenders. And Ted knows that actually it's a really good thing for him, A, to stay humble enough to carry his own bags, but also the message that that sends to the rest of the organisation and his team about how he views himself and how he wants to be treated. So staying humble and approachable is a really key lesson of really effective leaders. One of the first things he does when he gets to the club is he asks everyone's name. And if you see Nate's reaction, he's particularly taken aback by this. But I always say, like, get to know everyone in an organisation because everyone has their role to play. And we see that with Nate, that he's actually kind of really overwhelmed by the fact that Ted has asked his name and B, remembers it throughout the rest of the series. And that obviously sets Nate's journey off. But, you know, Ted knows the importance of treating everyone with respect and understanding exactly who they are. And by asking and remembering everyone's names, even for people perhaps who aren't in your team or you don't see as key to your role, but by understanding people and recognising people is going to set you in good stead. One of the lovely elements within the show is obviously how Ted and Rebecca's relationship develops. But in this first episode, he asks her how she's doing, how she's holding up. And actually that's really important. Sometimes as a manager, you're really focused on your team below you and yourself, but you should check in on a more personal level with those bosses above you. And that's going to help you build more strong and effective relationships, but equally that they know that you see them as a whole person and not just their boss and someone who's there to kind of take problems too. So by recognising that everyone around you is human and everyone will have good days and bad days, will just help you to build effective relationships with those above you. One of the areas where Rebecca really shines in this first episode is where she holds the press conference, or indeed kind of intervenes in the press conference. And this is good for a couple of ways. As a woman, she absolutely is not overwhelmed by the amount of criticism she's receiving, and equally she is able to hold that room and control the questioning and cut things off when they need to be. And as a manager, that's an important way to do that. Sometimes meetings might get slightly out of hand or people get off track. And it's really important as a manager or a leader to be able to bring the conversation back to where it needs to be, to keep it professional and to keep people on track. So the way that she commands that press conference is good, not only from her kind of personality approach and how she's able to do that, but equally as a manager, there are going to be times when you need to steer conversations off unhelpful tracks. So the way she holds that press conference and the way that she deals with it is really impressive. We also see Ted praising Nate. And this is a really good example of how we should say thank you and also say when a job's well done as a manager. Quite often we're quite quick to pick up the phone if something's wrong or we need something quite quickly, but making sure that you take the time to say thank you and to give positive feedback is a real core tenet of effective management. And actually people respond really well to positive reinforcement and also feedback. So make sure that you take the time when something has gone well or the team have achieved something to feed that back and to give praise where it's necessary, because you know we don't want it to become a very unbalanced relationship where all you're doing is kind of giving the negative. So make sure that you're taking that time out to do the positive feedback is really important. When Ted and Coach Beard get into their office, the first thing they do is push their desks together. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it kind of shows the importance of communication. Previously, their desks were facing away from each other, and actually what they wanted to do was have them in the middle where they could look directly at each other. And that's how they show that they know communication is really important for effective teams, but also how the environment can affect you. So when we were working in offices, and obviously many of you probably aren't really back in offices, but the kind of setup of the work environment and the hierarchy it can give can be off-putting. So if you are a manager who has their own office and everyone else is out on the floor, perhaps thinking about working out on the floor, or if you're in an open plan office but managers tend to sit in a certain area, by having physical proximity and having a clear ability to communicate at any time with people is really going to help build your team morale and open up those lines for communication. In one of the first encounters between Ted and Roy, we see Roy behave in his kind of trademark critical and cynical way. But it's Ted's ability to be resilient in that situation and show he has a positive attitude. He knows he's going to win over Roy. Roy doesn't know that yet, but Ted knows he's going to. But Ted's ability to be resilient and not to kind of get offended at Roy's initial reaction, but to know this is a longer term game, and you know, management relationships will go on for a period of time, and you don't have to kind of win someone over the first time you meet them, but you have to be resilient enough to know that you want to try that in the future. So the way that Ted responds to Roy and their kind of first interactions just shows how much Ted has an empathy as a good leader, and also how he understands that this is a war, not a battle, and it's not about kind of everything going perfectly the first time you meet someone. And finally, one of the things that Ted does is set up the believe sign across the changing rooms, and that's really good because it sets basically a motto and a vision for the team, and it gives them a central point to rally. Throughout the series you will see the kind of importance of not only that motto but also where it's placed and how they use that, but Ted knows that he needs a central point, a central vision, and also to set out kind of how he wants the team to develop. So by doing that early on in his management career, it's a really good lesson. So setting a team vision, setting a way that you want to do things, and having a very visual representation of it just means that it's kind of ever present in the team's mind. So as you can see, Ted Lasso is packed full of good management tips and advice. So if you haven't watched it, please go and watch Ted Lasso now. If you have, I'd love to know what you think some of the key management lessons in the first episode are, or if you've ever kind of been managed by a Ted or met a Roy, it'd be great to know that. So please leave a comment below, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video where we're going to talk more about Ted Lasso.